podcast part, then we'll go to the press conference because Justice also has to leave soon. The whole point of the arbitration case is about a rules-based international order. And, well, this is my opinion. And the new president of the United States is not necessarily a paragon of rules-based international order. Greenland, Panama, I don't know what the heck is going to happen there. But there's some people, or at least this is the narrative some people are building, that with this new American administration, yes, you may have sympathetic figures like Marco Rubio, who has written on the need to help the Philippines. He's, of course, the new Secretary of State, someone very invested in our bilateral alliance. You have people like Elbridge Colby, who will be leading the policy in the Pentagon, who visited the Philippines the other year, and he made many reassuring statements. Hagseth, Mike Waltz, all of them said that it's important to have an Asia-focused strategy. That's all good. But the reality is that, on one hand, you have Trump being Trump, talking about grand bargain, deal-making, saying all of these things about China, which it's not very reassuring, just to be honest about it, including his, volte-face on the TikTok ban, which some people, even in his own party, are raising eyebrows about. And then, of course, there's also the more concrete fact that some of the new appointments coming into top positions, including some of the folks who lead the Southeast Asia portfolio in the Pentagon. I want to read a quote from one of them. Ayaw ng pangalan, baka magkaaway naman. No, I mean, essentially the argument of some of them is that so one of them who's going to lead this is Mr. Byers. He wrote last year, the U.S. might begin a cooperational spiral with China by proposing to remove U.S. military forces or weapon systems from the Philippines in exchange for the Chinese Coast Guard executing fewer patrols in the South China Sea or West Philippine Sea. I mean, these are the kind of arguments that these people are making just a year or months before getting appointed to very top positions. So let's just call them isolationist folks, right? I don't want to put any more labels on that. I just find it fascinating that there are people who are openly saying, yung Philippines, sorry na lang ha, kunin namin yung mga weapon system namin, mag-usap. And this should be worrying. With the combination of Trump also saying all of those things, let's make a deal. So how do we make sure that we hedge against worst case scenarios? Of course, we have to wish for the best, work for the best, but what are we doing to make sure that we're not over-dependent on the United States and don't end up as a pun in what some of these folks are calling a cooperation spiral rather than a deterrence logic when dealing with China?
Well, Richard, the U.S. has been an isolationist country twice in history, before World War I and before World War II, and they could be isolationists again. And that's really the fear there, that they will say, okay, we'll agree with China to divide the world. President Xi has offered the U.S., let's divide the world. The first island chain will be, everything within the first island chain will belong to China, and beyond that, the U.S. And, Trump is a deal maker. We don't know how he will decide eventually, although we have a lot of friends in the State Department, in the U.S. Congress, Senate, and House, and the military. But the decision maker is something we really don't know. Because remember, Trump said just before he assumed office, said, we cannot blame Russia for invading Ukraine. What if tomorrow Trump will say, we cannot blame China for invading the Spratlys? So we really don't know. So how do we react to this? How do we respond? We have to strengthen our external defense. There's no other way. We have to we have to modernize the AFP. And that's why we're questioning why Congress chopped off 15 billion from the AFP modernization fund and put it in the flood control of DPWH. We have to strengthen our own, because at the end of the day, we can only rely on ourselves. The U.S. might become isolationist. So we have to have deterrence, just like Vietnam. They have 6-kilo class submarines, they have fighter jets, they have anti-ship missiles. Of course, they cannot beat China in a war, but they can give China a bloody nose, and that is enough for deterrence. That's what we want, deterrence only. Right now, we don't have that deterrence yet. So we have to spend more on AFP modernization to achieve that deterrence, because we don't know really what Trump will do. Because Trump is threatening to withdraw from NATO. If he can withdraw from NATO, that's a mutual defense treaty of the U.S. with Europe, he can also say, we'll withdraw from our mutual defense treaty with the Philippines. He can do that also. If he can do that with Europe, with more reason he can do that with us. So we have to be prepared for that day. Thank
Right.
you.
To be fair, I don't think even Trump knows what Trump wants. So, like, the theory is the last whisper in his ear. But I don't want to go down that road. AFP, Colonel Padilla, what is the Philippines doing to make sure na hindi tayo hostage sa whims of whoever is occupying the White House, whether it's Trump, whether whoever is the next? Because as a sovereign nation, we have to have a say, right, on what the heck we're going to do about our own national interests. The reason I'm saying this is because as we speak, although just for transparency purposes, it was the former Biden National Security Council people who tagged me with this one. Oh, yung mga magre-replace sa amin, ganito. And the next thing I know, even my Republican friends were saying, check out some of these guys getting in. So, shout out to some of our friends there. But the reality is that, parati natin pinag-usapan yan eh. There are alliances are important, but at the end of the day, as a sovereign nation, you call your own shot. You have to protect yourself. What are the things we have been doing and what are the things we should do, aside from the fact na hindi kaltasan yung budget from 50 to 35 billion? That's 30%. Yeah.
Yes, no. Ano naman dyan is hindi tayo dependent on one particular nation for anything. What we do, even in our RORE missions, no, we do it independently despite offers for some nations to help us conduct it. No? So over and above that, while all of these things are happening, no, we are modernizing, we are strengthening our alliances, upskilling our personnel. No? So makita niyo dyan yung mga kasama sa ating mga balikatan exercises, how we upskill our personnel, no? Yung skill sets nila, integration and interoperability with yung mga capabilities ng like-minded nations. So we have also our RAA with Japan, no? Itong huling balikatan exercises, which used to be US and Philippines lang, last year we had active participation of the French Navy, and Australia was also there actively participating, no? And different countries who were there as observers are now signifying intentions to also have active participation in the different exercises that we hold. So we are not dependent on one particular nation for all of these things. So lumalawig itong ating cooperation with the like-minded nations and well-meaning nations, because at the end of the day, all of us wants the same goal, no? To have and maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific. And a lot of other countries are now showing actively that they're into this one goal with us. No?
And in fact, maybe just in the same way in Europe, there's discussion about them shouldering their own burdens more, the Germans and the French. Maybe the effect could also be our allies in the region will also step up. It's not like Japan or India or small players or Australia. These are trillion-dollar economies. So I think before pushing the panic button, we have to realize that, yes, China is big, but there are also other players who are not small. And some of them are even bigger than China potentially, like India down the road. Kaya Yusek, from a National Security Council point of view, how are we, I don't want to use the word hedge because we're an ally with the United States, obviously, but how are we making sure that our options are not circumscribed by the whims of, wouldn't be nice if we have just peace with China, we'll solve all the problems together. Like, how do we make sure we're not confined to those kinds of...
Siguro, Richard, let me answer that question by first saying that we are at the early stages of the Trump administration. No, it's very early. No, we're still trying to, even the people in the State Department, even the people in the Pentagon.
And of course, sorry, if you can also say something on the 90-day freeze on the aid.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Even the American public, they're also trying to find out, navigate through the new administration. So I think this is just part of the adjustment period, no? But what I think what I must emphasize is in the early stages of the administration, or like 2 days after the oath taking, Secretary Manalo and Secretary Rubio had this very important phone call.
It was number 3 on the list of all countries.
That's right. And here in this call, Secretary Rubio underscored the U.S. Ironclad commitment. No, I was not really expecting this early, because if you remember, this Ironclad commitment really was utilized by the Biden administration. So it's now being used by Secretary Marco Rubio. So that really shows the continuity of American support and, as I quote, ironclad commitment to the Mutual Defense Treaty. And both parties also talked about advancing security cooperation, talked about expanding economic ties, and deepen access for regional cooperation. And this was followed by another meeting between Defense Secretary Gibo Chodoro and the new National Security Advisor Mark Waltz, wherein they also talked about strengthening the alliance between the Philippines and the United States. So I think if we base our assessment here, no, it really shows the solid foundation of the U.S.-Philippine alliance. No? And it would be too early for us to speculate on what this might be. Now, talking about how the U.S. deals with NATO, really, President Trump's issue with NATO is about the contribution of member nations into the cost of NATO, because the United States is the one paying for the large chunk of NATO expenses. So what Trump wants is, since we're providing this security umbrella, you have to step up as well, because the cost to the United States is enormous, and he would like to devote these resources to the American citizens, to the domestic.
So logically, what are we in a position to tell Trump, you stand with us because we're doing our part?
Exactly. And I think we have shown to the United States that we have been ramping up also our defense spending. We now have a very clear comprehensive archipelagic defense concept, which really requires enormous sums of money into the investment into Philippine defense, to military spending or security spending. So if we follow the logic in NATO, wherein he's asking the NATO members to devote more of their resources, I think 3% of their GDP to defense, we're also doing the same, no? Doing the same, spending a lot of money to be able to continue the Rehorizon 3, which is now focused on external defense and the territorial security of the country.
So in short, you're saying we're not in the same boat, we're not even in the same lake. Because when it comes to Trump's concern with Europe, it's a completely different situation from ours. Because here in Asia, we're doing our part.
Exactly.
And that the foundations are strong and bipartisan. Just to be clear, the 90-day freeze,
yes,
what kind of aid does it affect? Does it affect foreign military financing from US? Does it affect other kind of defense aid agreements we have? Ano yung mga apektado dyan? And by the way, freeze lang yun, hindi ibig sabihin mawawala yan, di ba? Yeah.
Kasi there are two documents that came out of the White House. The first, from the United States government. The first one is the executive order issued by President Trump. And the second one was the memorandum issued by Secretary Rubio. And the one by President Trump it's still unclear. It's a bit ambiguous on what is the extent of the review being done. So even if we talk to our friends in the United States government, they're still trying to find out exactly, no? But my understanding is that it does not cover things like balikatan. It mostly covers development assistance to the Philippines, in particular the USAID projects in the Philippines. So anything funded by USAID, anything funded by the State Department will undergo a 90-day review. It doesn't mean that these projects will not continue. It's just that the President Trump wants to make sure that all of these projects are aligned to U.S. foreign policy. And if we base this on the discussions that we've had with U.S. leaders, no, members of the Trump administration, as I mentioned early, is that in my opinion, all of the projects that the U.S. are doing here are aligned with U.S. Foreign policy, especially the question of, does this assistance strengthen the United States, or does it make the United States more secure? And I think all of their projects here make the United States more secure.
Right. And I think probably it also has to do with the culture wars and issues there. Maybe Trump administration is just making sure yung pera hindi na pupunta sa mga woke projects, as they call it, right? It's not really about, MAGA, we don't care about the world. So you're saying it's not an isolationist thing, it's just a kind of a reassessment of some basic alignment in terms of America's spending abroad, because this is taxpayers' money for Americans, so it should be understandable. Again, I'm saying this because we have friends who are making mountain out of this. And sinasabi na, paano na yung mga budget ng mga bayaran ng Amerika? May mga nagpapatawa. Sabi, kamusta naman in China? Medyo nag-shrink yung economy. Baka naman. Last point, and then I want to open it up. Commodore Tarila, of course, your PhD was from Japan. Philippine Coast Guard has absolutely great relationship with Japan. Japan played a very important role in modernization of our Coast Guard. What do you have to say about the other important players in light of the fact that we had an RRA ratified with Japan, the French are coming in, and I think people forget, actually, a lot of our modern weapon systems are not American, they're Koreans, they're Indian, Israeli. You get what I'm saying? So I think people forget that actually we are very diversified already in terms of our defense acquisitions, and also in Coast Guard, how much helpful other countries are aside from the U.S.
Thank you, Richard. But before that, I would like to share my optimism muna,
Yes.
for this Trump administration. I think people has already forgotten that the first time that they clarified the Mutual Defense Treaty that is also covering South China Sea was during the time of President Trump and having Secretary Pompeo as a Secretary of State in 2019. That was the first time that the U.S. government clarified that the Mutual Defense Treaty can be applied in the South China Sea. So, Trump has been like that since Trump 1.0 during his first administration. So ngayon, he can say whatever he wants, but with the cabinet members that are in place right now, and I'm also a believer that United States is a mature democratic country. There are democratic institutions in place that will not allow the U.S. government to, deteriorate from being protector of the rules-based order that we all enjoy. And, without going into the details kasi alis si Justice Carpio, I would also like to highlight that the transparency effort of the Philippine government is also anchored in protecting our interests na hindi tayo dependent sa isang bansa lamang. The transparency initiative that we're doing is to create awareness to the international partners who are protector of the rules-based order. We have to make sure that across Europe, Japan, Australia, and the entire world, to include India, that there is this one country that is intentionally and blatantly violating the international law. I've always been mentioning this. The transparency efforts allow the international community to understand that our fight in the West Philippine Sea is not just for us, Filipinos. It's not just for our own sovereignty. It is a fight for everybody that wants to preserve the rules-based order. Otherwise, we're going to go back to the system before the First and Second World War that might justifies whatever actions that they can do. And that is what we're doing right now. The mere fact that we launched transparency efforts 2 years ago, marami ng bansa ang nakipag-ugnayan sa Armed Forces of the Philippines, Philippine Coast Guard, to deepen our security cooperation and to support our modernization efforts for the military. We can now hear from Germany, France, United Kingdom, and Canada as well. Even the Indian government is also supportive of our efforts. And that's another positive impact of the Transparency Initiative.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for that.